Building.
Competence, registration and endorsement in psychology. Existing as specialized forms, psychology is separated into various fields like clinical, organizational, forensics, neuropsychology, etc. These different fields use the discipline and research methods of psychology to understand cognition and behavior, which can be used to solve problems. Accredited fourth-year courses must provide graduates with advanced training and education in core research areas of the discipline, being able to assess, construct, and interpret cognitive and personality assessments, and to understand the scientific basis of psychology and how it is affected by cultural, professional, social,
and historical contexts. Fourth-year courses
provide the foundations, and thus more education is needed for specialization. Similar to medical education, psychological education emphasizes the importance of tacit knowledge, which according to Epstein and Herdit 2002 is the use of technical skill, values, communication, knowledge, clinical reasoning, practice, and daily reflection utilized for the benefit of society and the individual. Rubin 2007 states that tacit knowledge can build up competence by becoming familiar with the skills, abilities, procedures, self-perceptions, motivations, dispositions, values, and beliefs to which drive professionals to fulfill their tasks. This is quite interesting as an emphasis on tacit knowledge is holistic and all-encompassing, as opposed to the old model of learning where individuals accumulate knowledge and facts. This new model of learning rather emphasizes active participation and continual pursuit of knowledge, as opposed to passive listening and sponging of facts and figures. This also makes great sense in the realm of proactive learning, where professionals deal with the complexities of social interaction. It's not just a static structure or operation. Provisional registration comes after fourth-year psychology, in which the trainee may pursue a 2-year internship or a postgraduate study here in Australia. A period of supervised practice must be completed for would-be practitioners to become eligible for general registration as a psychologist. Necessary competencies within an internship include knowledge of the discipline, communication and interpersonal relationships, working cross-culturally, knowing ethical, professional and legal matters,
using psychological assessment and measurement,
understanding research, working across the lifespan and utilizing intervention strategies. Skills in counseling include being able to engage in effective listening, paraphrasing, using informed consent, being confrontational if appropriate, terminating of sessions, using encouragement, etc. As a result, psychologists develop and become competent in the general ins and outs of the profession, though I admit it is a rather long and tedious process. Additionally, psychologists should be familiar with core versus specific competencies. Core competencies are the shared knowledge and skills that all psychologists have regardless of their specialized field of psychology. Specific competencies, on the other hand, are skills and knowledge that are limited to not just the specialized field but also limited to the setting, special population, tools and techniques that the psychologist uses. It is up to training and psychological education to
balance and gain competence of the
different fields. This, I think, is important since psychologists can build up a great deal of knowledge and engage with a variety of issues and topics. Thus, the field is a continual platform for learning and maintaining propriety to solve said issues. Professional competence assessment is hard since it involves analyzing what psychologists know and don't know. And as you know, there is always plenty of what we do not know. Synder and Elliot 2005 proposed a matrix model to identify the intersecting personality and environmental variables, measured vertically, comparing each other's strengths and weaknesses measured horizontally. This thus shows how the personality and environment can affect competence. Synder and Elliot then used Bronfenbrenner and Ceci 1994's model to situate the matrix within individual, interpersonal, institutional, and societal spheres of influence, thus highlighting ever-increasing wider contexts that influence psychologists' competency.
Rodolfa et al. 2005 proposed a cube model of competence,
in which there are 3 dimensions of competence, spanning foundational, functional, and professional development, knowledge of which builds up on top of each other, adding more depth and complexity in dealing with clients. These models are interesting in that they attempt to visually depict the amorphous, being, that is, psychological professional competence. The models, however, would continue to have a problem of either being too simplistic to accurately depict how competency works, or being too complex, thus not being able to predict anything. Nevertheless, it is a nice try, and I do prefer seeing images than blobs of text. Objective Structured Clinical Examinations, OSCEs, were created by Sheen, McGillivray, Gurtman, and Boyd 2015, which was used to assess psychological graduates. It had a checklist that they must fulfill like any marking criteria would, and it used patients to test the psychologist's knowledge of signs, symptoms, and diagnoses, etc. An issue with the OSCE is that it places stress on students to perform and is only a temporal snapshot in one point in time. One must also consider that performance is different to competence, as performance could involve knowing, but not necessarily knowing how to appropriately apply, not having that tacit knowledge per se. Assessors of competence need to account for the different influences. For example, Miller's model distinguishes on a pyramid the differences and how each aspect builds up on top of each other, spanning from knowledge to competence, which is know-how, performance is show-how, and action is doing so. Would-be psychologists need to achieve 70% or over in these assessments. One must also be aware of the various registration and endorsement pathways. That being said, registration is different from endorsement, since registration is becoming a general psychologist, as aforementioned before, after completing the 4th-year pathway and achieving said score. Endorsement, on the other hand, is becoming specialized, whether being a clinical counseling, organizational psychologist, etc. It requires an accredited doctorate, master's, or other equivalent qualification. Finally, after achieving the long road to becoming an accredited, registered, and endorsed psychologist, they have to be fit to practice. Learning becomes a continual pursuit of the profession, and competence assessment helps to protect the public, since psychologists continue to understand the ins and outs. A disadvantage of this process is that psychologists know little of business acumen, since they have 0 years of business training, obviously. They're going to have to learn management, leadership, government policy, Medicare, record disposal, selling businesses, keeping up to date, etc., etc., when wanting to open their own private practice. This is an unfortunate downside of the education model in Australia for psychologists, but hey, they can learn it after being a registered psychologist from experience. Finally, according to Lave and Wegner, 1991, psychologists need to be aware of the community of practice, since professional practitioners are situated and share knowledge and culture of the said practice. There are various collaborations, interactions, and expert engagements that allow trainee psychologists to become an expert, moving from the periphery to within the community of practice itself. In summation, we looked at how psychologists build up their level of competence and tacit knowledge. It is a long road to provisional registration, engaging with core and eventual specific competencies, going from registered to accredited and endorsed. And we also looked at the matrix model and competency cube, the objective structured clinical examinations being fit to practice, lack of business competence, and the community of practice. There is so much to consider when developing necessary propriety in the profession, thus making one no longer a novice, but instead becoming a pro. Thanks for watching. Bye.